All right, all right, all right. Hey ho, let's go. Thank you, my legendary friends, for joining me today on Legends and Losers. This is Christopher, and we have an incredible a show for you, an extra special show for you that sits right at the heart of our mission of having a dialogue around designing a legendary life and a legendary business. And Colin is not with us, unfortunately, today. He's in Liechtenstein on a strategic mission. I think he's there getting his Stein licked. Ooh. All right. Our guest today is none other than one of the absolute pioneers in the personal development movement, the self-improvement movement, Bix Bickson. And I'll get into who Bix is, but to suffice it to say, he made a difference in my life, and that would be the understatement of the year. As I said, the show sits at the heart of our mission. How do you design? How do we open up a dialogue around designing a legendary life and a legendary business, and ideally at the same time? And if you go all the way back to Abraham Maslow, when he introduced his hierarchy of needs, if you remember it as a pyramid, when you sort of get all your base needs taken care of, the ultimate, that sort of top of the pyramid is what he called self-actualization. And Maslow described that as, quote, the desire to become more and more what one is, to become everything that one is capable of becoming. And interestingly enough, Maslow died in 1970. He was born in 1908. And when he created the hierarchy of needs, he said, with self-actualization at the top, he said that he believed that only 1% of the people in the world were actually self-actualized. Well, today things are they're a lot different. According to the Barat Book Bureau, who measures this stuff, the category of motivational self-improvement programs and products is about a $6.9 billion market. And today, if you go back to Dale Carnegie and then all the way up through today, we have Oprah and Dr. Phil and Deepak Chopra, and of course the ultimate category king of self-improvement, Tony Robbins. Everybody's into this stuff, and you hear words like transformation and breakthrough and the like all over the place. And that wasn't the case. Certainly when I did my first self-improvement training program, which was in the late 80s, when I was about 18 years old. And yet today it's commonplace. Now, I always, on any topic, look for philosophical leadership from David Lee Roth. And Diamond Dave on this topic says, quote, the problem with self-improvement is knowing when to quit. Diamond Dave. And I think most of us listening to Legends and Losers, most of you are probably never going to quit that. Regardless, it's interesting how popular this stuff is. To put that into context, according to a story on Forbes, in 2015, 94% of the millennials reported that personal improvement commitments or goals were important to them, compared with 94% of the boomers and 81% of Gen Xers, of which I'm one. Maybe the Gen Xers are the most so improved they don't need to keep going like David Lee suggests. All right. Now, today's conversation is one that is going to challenge you and open you up and engage you in a way that I think the average discussion around these topics does not. And that's because of who our guest is, Bix Bickson. And I've known Bix I met him over 30 years ago, and I re-met him about a year ago. So when I was a young man, I was struggling to make my way and really design a place for me in the world. I had a lot of baggage, a lot of things I needed to overcome, and I needed a lot of motivation and focus. And I really wanted to live up to the expectations of my family and to make something of my life. And my dear friend Jack, who I started my first company with, did this training program, and he came back and he was absolutely on fire. And the minute he told me about it, I wanted to do it. And Bix Bickson was the guy who led that program for me. It was called, today it's called the Landmark Forum. Back then it was just called the Forum. And Bix was my forum leader. And I would tell you, you could describe my life as before Bix and after Bix. Because before Bix, I was a young man struggling. And the trajectory of my life changed. There was a step function in my life after spending time with Bix. And I'd never met anybody he was like me. I related to him very much in that he was loud and funny and outrageous, and he swore, and yet somehow it worked. And, my whole life up until, then was, hey, Christopher's too much and you got to hold yourself back. And I was always trying to dampen myself down because, teachers always told me to shut up and sit down, and that I was too much. Well, Bix was way too much for sure. But somehow for Bix, it worked. And for me, it often got me in trouble. And so that was a fascinating thing. A fascinating question for me. How could you be fully self-expressed and yet have who you are be authentic and real, but at the same time have it work in the world so that you weren't, quote unquote, too much? The other thing for me was, I grew up in a family of struggle, of very modest means. And so I never thought that financial freedom was a possibility. And I even might have thought a little bit that people who made money were, maybe crooked or something was wrong with them. And so I grew up in a context where money was what stopped us. And making money was really, really hard. I had a paper route from the time I was 9 or 10 years old. And, to make money, I had to deliver newspapers. And at the time when I was 18, I was starting a business, and the business was getting going, and you know how hard that can be. And so there was this moment in the session with Bix where this woman got up and shared with him that, that was her problem as well. And she was arguing for it. It reminds me, and the argument she was having, Bix would say, yeah, but you don't, and she'd say, oh, Bix, you don't understand, it's really hard and people aren't hiring and it's a recession and I don't have the right qualifications, or I don't know how to start a company. She had all this stuff, right? All this Samsonite's worth of baggage around the issue, around the topic of making money. And it reminds me of that great quote from Richard Bach from the legendary book Illusions: argue for your limitations and sure enough, they're yours. And she was arguing for her limitations around money and financial freedom, as was I. My brain was saying the same types of things as she was interacting with Bix that she was saying. And finally, Bix sort of said, okay, enough. I got it. In the world, would you agree there's lots of money? And she said, yeah, but Bix, you don't understand. It's so hard. How do you? I said, I know. In the world, would you agree there's lots of money? And finally, she stopped and she looked at him and she said, yes, Bix, there is. And he said, all right, go get some. And in that moment, my life changed. Because although most of my brain was screaming, yelling, agreeing with the woman, because I had the same thought process she had, the 1 or 2% of my brain said, what if Bix is right? And just considering that fact, and that I could design a life and a business where it was not one of struggle and lack, but one of abundance. That was when that idea hit me, and it changed my life. Well, Bix and I didn't see each other much after that, and I lost touch with him, and it's been 30 years. And about 9 months ago, I found him on this incredible thing called the interweb, LinkedIn specifically. And I sent him a note and I said, dear Bix, you don't know me, but I sure as fuck know you. And I would love to tell you my story, because my life can be summarized as before Bix and after Bix. And I've had an amazing life for which I'm grateful. And I love to share my story with you. And most of all, thank you and tell you how much I love you. And he immediately got back to me and said, how about Thursday at 2 or something along those lines? And we reconnected. And ever since, we've been connected, so much so that this January, I flew up to Vancouver, British Columbia, Vancouver, as we say it at home. And I spent an entire day with Bix and his son, actually working on their business. And then I had the incredible opportunity to have dinner with both of them and with Bix's wife, Christine. And for me, that time together was the completion of 30 years of an opportunity to say thank you. And now that Bix is back in my life and we're doing some work together, it's just been the most extraordinary thing I can imagine to have him back. So let me tell you a little bit about him. Bix is a future hacker and the co-founder of Bickson 2 with his son, Joe. They help people and organizations to design the future of their choosing. For over 30 years, Bix has been regarded as one of the world's foremost authorities on the ability to accelerate measurable change and produce material outcomes in the future. Long before words like breakthrough and transformation were commonplace, Bix was leading programs and development training for individuals and for companies. He's helped to shape the famous Starbucks culture and helped to produce material results and outcomes at companies like Microsoft, Guinness, and Lululemon. He was among the very early leaders of what today is called the Landmark Forum. And today he works with companies who really want to help hack their future so that they can produce the results they want to produce, the material outcomes they want to produce in the future. And he is a master sensei at that. He's an incredible storyteller. And, on today's episode of Legends and Losers, I ask you to think with your listening and think about what you're thinking. Because Bix is going to take us to places we probably haven't been before. He's going to challenge us to think in powerful new ways. He's incredibly charismatic. I think he's handsome. We share a similar hairdo. He's insightful, articulate, and incredibly candid, as candid as you can be. He taught me how to be fully expressed and responsible for it. And I'll share with you a quote from Bix. He says, "We must pierce the cynicism of our time and kindle within ourselves a spirit that brings the insight and the inventiveness to hack the future." With that, here's Bix Bickson.
It's both personal and, what I've noticed consistently is it's not personal. It's that we're all walking around thinking somebody's going to find us out, and we have very little willingness to realize that that's not a personal phenomenon. That's a cultural, lives with so many of us.
And so why do you think, Bix, that the imposter syndrome, as you're calling it, is so prevalent for people?
Well, I think for one thing is by the time you walk out of a supermarket and you read the magazine covers, you're convinced that you're not rich enough, not thin enough, not powerful enough, not famous enough, not beautiful enough. And so the world is consistently there invalidating us and telling us we should be something other than we are. And I think what's one of the things that distinct about the work that I've been working on for many, many years, and one of the, is that every time we start a conversation with a company or a group of people, I always start by saying, I want to let you know who you are for me. Because many times, I'm the 5th or the 15th or the 50th consultant or somebody like that has walked into that room, and they're rolling their eyes, they're looking at their laptops or their phones, and you can feel the palpable, when will this end and when can I get out of this room with this person?
More leadership, management, personal development, bullshit, offsites that are a waste of time, some idiot who wants to interview me, all of that.
Yeah.
I would pay money, Bix, to be a fly on the wall on a one-on-one meeting where you walk into an executive's office and they think that you're just another douchebag consultant, whatever. That would be a fascinating conversation to watch.
Well, part of being a future hacker is to be invisible. And so I put on the same gray or black pants, the same blue check shirt, the same blue blazer. I've got my black roller bag and my black shoulder bag. So I know when you go to the airport, we look totally like these people right out of what was that famous movie where everybody was the same?
The Stepford Wives.
Stepford Wives, but it was The Matrix. The Matrix,
yeah.
So I've learned that I have to look like them, so it's not as scary at the beginning. Okay, this guy sort of looks like a normal human being,
like something I recognize.
I recognize that. But what I say at the beginning of any conversation is, I want to let you know who you are for me before we start. And who you are for me is that you're already intelligent, you're already successful, you're already accomplished, you're already dedicated, you're already open, engaged, committed human beings. And you've built a foundation of both success and dedication and accomplishment, both in your life and in your work. And what this is about is not at all questioning or invalidating what you've built. You have built a foundation. And who I am in the matter is I'm an invitation, a challenge, an opportunity to see what's beyond that foundation that you've already built. Because, Christopher, people and companies do not want to be fixed, right? And so,
that's great. You know, I mean, I spent 10 years as a business coach after 20 years in business, as you well know.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I hung up my coach's jersey was exactly that. It's like, you know what? Your average CEO, at least in my Silicon Valley experience, doesn't want to talk to me.
Yes, exactly. And so at the beginning of that conversation, or any conversation, my commitment is to create a experience so that people can breathe a little bit, relax a little bit, knowing that I know I'm the 5th or the 15th or whatever number I've walked in. And the difficulty today, the difficulty was less when I started this in the 1980s, because the words I was using at that time, breakthrough, transformation, all those words were radical words. And so people really rolled their eyes. The difficulty today is that those words are mainstream. And the difficulty with that is that people say, oh, I've been through that. We did that. We did that. You know, we've been through transformation. We've been through breakthrough. So then the pressure is on me then to create it in such a way where it's not the same old thing for people, where they actually see, wait a second, something's going on here that's worth engaging in. And one of the things I've thought about recently is this business of tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge, which grows through personal experience and experimentation, and it's not transferable. You can't teach it, and you can learn it.
Say more about that, Bix.
Yeah. So, you know, I've developed a enormous amount of ideas, approaches, and experiences. And it's easy for me to think that those are what's valuable, okay? But there's something else going on, which is who I am being, who we're being there with those people. And that is the communication of something that allows people to recognize, wait a second, this person is being in a different way that I am, or I know how to be consistently.
So I hate to interrupt you, Bix, but it's a fast.
Yeah.
Thank you. When you say who we are being, you know, first a comment and then a question. The comment is, it reminds me of, and I forget who said it. Somebody said, who you are speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying.
Yes.
But so could you kind of unpack a little bit what who you're being means? Yes.
Okay. We are about to begin our 3-day Christopher and Bix conversation.
Yes. This is the longest podcast ever.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So who we're being means. So you know that you go to a movie and you have an inspiring experience. And you come out of that movie and we say to ourselves, oh, that's made a difference, real influence in my life, made a difference for me. That's a wonderful experience. And somehow that experience disappears. We're not able to sustain it or generate it or what I call find access to it. So the work that we do is about designing ways for people to have direct access to that conversation that you just had, called who are we being when we're accomplishing the commitments that were the results that we're committed to.
So if we go see, I don't know, pick any movie that inspires you, go see Spielberg's Lincoln.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know.
Yeah.
That movie for me was an experience of being with Abraham Lincoln, right? Yeah. And it's interesting, you think about a character like that, a human being like that, and that person today for us takes on this mythical quality, like they weren't a real person, like they were Batman or something, or Wonder Woman or something, mm-hmm. right? And when I see a movie like that, what occurs to me is, holy fuck, Abraham Lincoln was a dude. He was a regular guy like you and I, who did what he did, yes. right? And so, I come out of a movie like that thinking, well, how can I be as big in my world as Abraham Lincoln, right? That's the inspiration in the movie. Yeah. Is that what you're talking about when we're inspired to be, very, I don't know what other words you use, Bix, you can tell me, but our big self or our biggest self.
Yeah, exactly. And at different times in our lives, we've been that, right? And so the question is how to allow for access. What's the pathway for access to that on a consistent basis? So one way to think about it is what people do for a living is talk, right? Particularly the people that we're talking to, right? Some of the people, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, the vast majority of people here, a huge percentage of their income and well-being and the like is a direct result of the things that come out of their mouth.
Yeah, and even people on the front line experience that, right?
For sure.
And particularly in the shift of the economy from a resource-based economy to an information-based economy, it's that much more real. And so what we do, so I say that to people, is what you do for a living is talk. And then the question is your speaking making the difference that you're committed to? Okay? And I say that there's 3 mysteries in the world: air to a bird, water to a fish, and humankind to ourselves.
So you think that we, being human, what it is to be a human being, is a mystery to human beings?
Yeah, we don't see the water we're swimming in. And so then I say to people, when does a fish know about water? And everybody says, when it's out of water. I say, yeah, as long as the fish is in water, for the fish, it's what water, right? As soon as you take it out of water.
Holy fuck, no water, bad, way bad.
So I say to people, our first job is to recognize, to experience, to see what is the water we're swimming in, and to ask ourselves, will this water give us the future we're committed to? And the great thing about organizations, even though, I say to people, for many years, there was these large animals that roamed the earth. And there's a couple of theories about why they no longer roam the earth.
Oh, they do still roam the earth, though, Bix.
Keep going.
The Tyrannosaurus Rex is alive and well in my garden.
Yeah.
7 of them.
Okay. Yes.
No, right. I mean, seriously, scientists now have gotten protein from, in this case, T-Rex bones. And we're able to use those proteins to do comparison, that coupled with genome sequencing. And what we now know is the modern day chicken is a direct, like we are of Neanderthal man or person, the modern day chicken is a direct descendant of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And I'll tell you, when you look at our girls, if you were a worm, this would be fucking very much like a T-Rex experience. Anyways, I'm sorry. I just had to have a little bit of fun with you.
No,
But they roam the earth, and they are my
yeah,
daughters, so to speak.
I love it.
But they did have to morph very significantly.
Yeah, and there's a couple theories why they did. One was that the weather changed significantly, or their food source changed significantly. And what I say to people is it doesn't matter which theory we ascribe to. One thing we know is whatever information they had, that information did not allow them to adapt to the rapidly changing circumstances. And then I ask people to consider that it's not just every living organism that has information. It's also every living organization. For every living organism, that information lives in what we call DNA. And DNA is simply a set of instructions, a set of rules, a set of algorithms that tells every living organism what they can and cannot do. And then I ask people to consider that every organization also has DNA, a set of instructions, a set of rules that tells everybody in that organization what they can and cannot do. I'm asking you to consider that the DNA of organizations lives in the conversations we're having with each other, we're having with our customers, our competitors are having with us, and most importantly, the conversations we're having with ourselves. Why I ask people to consider that is because it's not theoretical. It's not abstract. We can listen to the conversations we're having, and we can ask ourselves, will these conversations give us the future we're committed to? So the great thing about organizations is they are not genetically encoded. Now we know about the BlackBerries and the Kodaks and the many, many, many other companies, particularly since 2000, that have gone out of existence. Why?
And Bix, if I could interrupt you, my buddy Ray Wong, the founder of Constellation Research, he was on Legends and Losers not that long ago, and in his book Disrupting Digital Business, he does a bunch of research on the Fortune 500.
Yes.
And to just put to underscore your point that companies are organisms, what Ray says is, quote, since 2000, 52% of the Fortune 500 have either gone bankrupt, been acquired, ceased to exist, or dropped out of the Fortune 500.
Yes.
52% in 17 years.
Yes. And so my job is to allow people to see that the DNA of organizations lives in conversations. Why I ask people to consider that is not abstract, it's not theoretical. We can listen to the conversations we're having with others, with our competitors, with our customers, and with ourselves. We can ask ourselves, will these conversations give us the future we're committed to? So that's a big idea for people, okay? Because my job is to give people access to what I call power. And my definition of power is the rate of translating ideas into actions and results. When you're being powerful, when a company is being powerful, they're not only innovating lots of ideas, but those ideas are being realized in the marketplace with velocity.
So power is the ability to convert ideas into results?
Yes, with velocity.
With velocity. Yeah, yes. in a time frame that matters.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so what allows for that is to have us, allows to get our hands on what are the dials and controls of what's actually happening in your business. And what's actually happening in your business is you talk for a living, and the people in this organization are speaking for a living. And the question is their speaking allowing you to accomplish what's committed to?
So let's maybe go to some specifics, Bix. In many ways, thanks to you, I am a student of language and languaging.
Yes.
And I try to pay attention in particular to language that creates context. And so, for example, when I was a kid growing up, people that lived on the street were called bums and winos, and today we call them homeless people. And I pay attention to things like that because languaging, of course, creates a demarcation point in thinking, which ultimately changes our actions and behaviors because we think about things differently, and we think about a homeless person a lot more differently than we do about a bum. And so I listen for those things. I'll give you another simple example. You ask somebody, "How are you?" And some people respond with, "Not too bad."
Exactly.
Right. And that may seem like a simple thing and a nothing to focus on or whatever, but I look at it and go, not too bad. What the fuck way to think about your life is not too bad.
Yes.
And the other one that I notice that happens a lot is people will say to you, "How's life treating you?"
Yes.
Like life's this thing out there, like the weather, and it rains in Vancouver, or in this case, Santa Cruz has been raining like crazy this winter. But like that, life's just this thing that happens to us, and we're sort of disconnected from it in our experience, and we have no say in the matter. And so, those are simple examples. But what I'm curious about is, okay, so in your world, Bix, what are the conversations that are either not powerful or less powerful, and how do we begin to have kind of conversations that do give us access to power, action, and ultimately results?
Well, what? First of all, I love your examples. So one way to think about it is most companies, most people are living in the results of other people's thinking.
Okay, hold on, slow down.
Yeah.
Let's say that really slowly. Most people
and most companies are living
in the results
of other people's thinking.
So most companies and most people are living in the results of other people's thinking.
Yes.
All right, keep going. Say more about that.
Okay. So once this idea that people are willing, my invitation to them is I'm not sitting there saying this is the truth and now you need to believe this new approach to consulting, this new body of knowledge or education. I'm not the expert. I'm inviting people to try on, consider ideas. So they're not sitting there because, what I say is school ruined us, because in school, what we learned is when somebody says something, our job is to sit there and say, well, I agree with it, I don't agree with it. It's right, it's wrong, it's good or bad, I like it, I don't like it. And what I call that is a conclusion. And my definition of a conclusion is when you stop thinking. So it's so easy.
So hold on. There's so much goodness here, Bix. So a conclusion is the place where I stop thinking.
Exactly. Right. And it's so much easier. It's so much easier. Oh, I like, I don't like, oh, I agree. Oh, I don't agree. Oh, that's good. That's bad. That's, so much easier.
I remember years ago, I think it was right around when Obama was running. So I remember going to see Chris Rock, the comedian, in Oakland, California, at this incredible theater called the Paramount. And he did this bit about politics, and he sort of said, how, and we don't want to have a political conversation, but what he did say was, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, that's all bullshit. He said, anybody who has an opinion on a topic before they've heard what their topic is really about is an idiot.
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about here, Bix?
Well, I'm accusing them of, we must avoid being like the man who trudged along unknowingly what he sought and whistled as he went for want of thought. That's a Dryden quote.
That's awesome.
We must avoid being like the man who trudged along unknowingly what he thought and whistled as he went for want of thought. So you didn't accomplish what you've accomplished and create what you've accomplished in your life, Christopher, because you whistled for want of thought. You didn't just trudge along. And so much of what happens in organizations, what happens in life, is that people stop thinking. And that hence we live in the results of other people's thinking. So I'm there to intervene, to hack, to get in, to go, okay, you got to where you've got to. That's fabulous. I love it. Congratulations. And something else is possible.
So if I were to play devil's advocate with you a little bit, I think some people, and when I first met you, your style was this maybe plus, that people were upset.
Yeah.
And so when some people hear, well, stop thinking. What do you mean? Fuck you. I have thoughts all day long. I mean, I'm thinking about shit all the time.
Yeah.
So could you maybe draw out for us the distinction between thinking and having thoughts?
Well, we'll definitely talk about that. But the first thing you talked about is some people are sitting there, who in the hell are you? Why are you saying this to me? So the work that I'm doing, the work that I've done, the work that I'm committed to is what I call having soft eyes.
Say more about that, Bix.
Yeah. So I'm communicating, I'm in love with you.
I'm in love with you too, really.
No, I'm communicating. Thank you.
I really am.
I'm communicating to all these engineers and people, these managers or these frontline people sitting in that room or standing wherever we're standing. My commitment is them to experience my love for them, that I'm on their side, that I'm the champion of their commitments. I'm the champion of their psyche. I'm here for you. So I'm communicating that while I'm asking people to consider that this is not a personal dilemma. You didn't make up school that had you stop thinking. That happened to you, right? So there's two things going on. Is I'm being in a way that I'm committed that they experience my partnership. The whole deal is based on relationship. And so if I lose somebody or if people are going away, I haven't created a strong enough relationship for them to listen to me. So, you said a comment a few minutes ago. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, isn't it interesting that when we develop the more rich of a relationship we have, the more permission we have to say stuff.
Yes.
And one of the things that you taught me is that it was possible to, in a very quick time frame, in seconds or minutes, have an experience both for me and for whoever the person is, the person I've just met, of strong connection, as though we've been friends for a long time. You taught me how to do that, how to connect with people.
Thank you.
In a way that feels very authentic, feels very real, and feels deeper than it should, given the amount of time we have now known each other. And what I've noticed about that skill that you taught me is I'll speak for myself, it gives me permission to say things that I might not otherwise be able to say. I remember years ago when I was a CMO, working with a colleague who had spent part of his career at IBM, and he said to me, "Christopher, I've never heard anybody talk like you." And if anybody else did, with the expletives and all of that, but it's even more than that. It's the directness and so forth. He said, nobody I've ever met could get away with saying what you say. Is that what you're talking about?
That's my commitment. Is people have that experience, and at the same time, a client's, in this case, in my work with clients, their creativity can be stolen by a consultant that knows too much.
Wow. Say more about that for Bix.
Right. So my job is not to be some guy that knows a whole bunch of shit. Right? I've got a whole bunch of shit. But
you sure do. And it's really, really fucking great shit.
Yeah, but that's not the point. What am I supposed to do? Because it's them that I'm committed to, right? And I can come up with all these ideas, distinctions, approaches, experiences, methodologies, but so what, right? So whatever meeting we're having, it's not my meeting. It's the client's meeting. And we've had conversations before that meeting so that it's what they're creating, and then I'm their partner in fulfilling that. So it shifts me from being the expert and the savior to being a partner.
And so you think about that. What I hear you saying is, you've trained yourself, Bix, to be with people in a way where you, and you correct me here, but where you disappear in a sense because you're committed to them. It's about them. And I don't want to say most, but let's say many people, and particularly people in the world of personal development and corporate development and so forth. And when they come to work with people, whether they're life coaches or business coaches or whatever, you get this distinct experience that it's kind of a lot about them.
Yes.
And so, how do you make yourself go away
Yeah.
and have it be about others?
Well, I've been in enough executive meetings where I didn't set that in place, because invariably when you're challenging the status quo, somebody on the executive team or whatever team is going to say to the CEO, why are we doing this? And if in that moment, if the CEO hesitates, I might as well pick up a pen off the table and stick it in my eye.
Yes. Right? And I have been in that meeting and I have almost shoved it right through my eye to the back of my head. Yes.
Yeah. And so that's called attacking the most vulnerable rather than confronting the most powerful. Attacking the most vulnerable rather than confronting the most powerful. So the most vulnerable is the consultant. I don't have any power. I don't have any authority. I don't have any ties to that organization. I'm totally the most vulnerable. So let's attack that person rather than confront the most powerful. And the most powerful is the system that has all of us acting this way. It's not personal. It's the system that has all, and nobody wants to confront that, because to confront that, you'd have to confront the system that we're all sitting in, that we know to some degree is either implicitly or explicitly, it's there and it's driving the show. We're not in charge.
And the system is creating, let me see if I get this right, Bix, conversations.
Yes.
That lead to thoughts, behaviors, and actions.
Yeah.
That sometimes are aligned with the good things the company wants to do, and a lot of times are not.
Right.
It's interesting. When I retired last year, I thought a lot about my life and the past, and I spent a lot of time thinking about the future, of course, the future that I wanted to hack. And one of the things I said to myself is, I have a commitment to, I'm never going to be in a dumb conversation again in my life.
It's a great commitment.
And my definition of a dumb conversation is a conversation that makes no sense for me to be in. And so isn't it interesting in business, we can end up in a lot of dumb conversations.
Yes.
Accidentally. And, smart people doing incredibly dumb things.
Yes.
And so if you think about future hacking, what are the conversations that we can have today that will hack the future to produce the material outcomes, the things that matter to us in the future?
Well, if people are willing to consider this business of what we do for a living is talk, then the question is, what is the talking or the speaking that you're having? So then I ask people to consider, as human beings, we're always having two conversations. We have the one that we have in the room with the boss there or colleagues there, and I ask them to call that one the foreground conversation. Then we leave the meeting, we go to the pub or someplace we're comfortable, and we have the other conversation. And I ask people to consider that's the background conversation. And then I say to people, which of those conversations has more influence on our actions? Everybody goes, the background. Good. So
why don't we have the background conversation in the foreground?
Right, exactly. So what we're inviting, challenging people to engage in are practices. Practices are actions that create new habits. And so if you're committed to something beyond what you're already accomplishing, creating something that's going to happen in the world that's going to be a product of power, then you have to act differently. So we have to take on practices that have us act differently. So the first practice I ask people to engage in is to say their background conversations in the meeting. And then I usually give people split up into, groups, go to a flip chart. I know the hot topics because I've talked to people in the company before this meeting. I know the hot topics, and I write a few of those on the flip chart. And then I ask people to go in your groups and write down all the background conversations that you can now think about for this particular division, this company, whatever. Christopher, people have said to me, Bix, they'll never do that in this company. Bix, they'll never do that in Saudi Arabia. Bix, they'll never do that in Malaysia. They'll never do that in China. Christopher,
Yes, Bix.
pages of flip charts in every country in the world. And then I'm watching them, and then I know when it's happening is when they start laughing because they're saying what's true for them, their background conversations. So then I ask people each group to say it out loud to the group. There's this.
But before you go there, Bix,
yeah,
what is it that stops people in the first place from naturally having the background conversation in the foreground? Anybody with an IQ larger than their shoe size understands that having the real conversation, in your vernacular, the background conversation, is the smartest thing to do. Why the fuck would we have some other conversation other than the conversation that's the real conversation? And yet this happens all the time. And so what is it, in spite of our intellect, we all understand that. Nobody, in business in particular, fucking stupid. Why are the real conversations the conversations we're not having? Yeah, well, the shortest history of humankind is that for a long time, humans were not the top of the food chain. These other quite evolved animals were at the top of the food chain, and we walked around literally with stones in our hands. So after the lions or some other animal ate whatever they ate, we came along at a current stage of evolving that we were, broke the bones of the animals that had already been eaten so we could take out what's they call the stuff in the middle of the bones? Like the marrow?
Yeah, the marrow.
Yeah.
So we were not at the top of the food chain. Then thousands of years passed and our brains expanded faster than anything on the planet. Yeah. And we went from the middle of the food chain to the top. But the animals at the top had spent millions of years evolving so that they could work out shit with each other, right? The gazelles got fast, so the lions couldn't quite catch them. You look at these animals and they're not having all the shit that we're having. And then boom, we're at the top of the food chain. But the trouble, when you're in the middle of the food chain, you're anxious as shit, right? Because any moment something can get you. Boom, we're hurtled to the top of the food chain. We didn't take the time to develop ourselves like the rest of the animals that got there. So we brought this anxiety with us. We brought this fear with us. We brought what's known as the Banana Republic dictator with us to the top of the food chain. So we're all walking around with these huge parts of our brains that scared shitless. So if you ask people to say their background conversations, they are like at a level of survival. You kidding?
So let me make sure I got what you're saying is that the the reason we don't have the background conversation in the foreground is because there's something threatening about the background conversation in the foreground, because we might get fired or ridiculed or whatever. So we don't have the real conversation because we're protecting ourselves, because we're still a primordial being that's afraid of getting eaten by the lions. And in this case, my boss being in the room's the lion.
Yeah, and I've got this, little part of my brain up front that knows compassion and connection and relationship, and then I've got this huge part of my brain that's saying, look out, look out, look out, right? So we're so fear driven.
I got to thank you for saying that. I don't know if anybody else is going to resonate, but for me, I am a person that has background conversations in the foreground.
Yeah.
And it actually makes me insane when I'm not having that. And one of my favorite expressions when I have that feeling, I wouldn't have articulated the way you did, but I often in a meeting will say, guys, I think we're having the wrong conversation here.
Yeah.
Right. And that's my attempt at bringing in your, dialogue, the background into the foreground. But the thing that you just explained to me is I've always thought, I know there's a bunch of shit that's wrong with me, that my wiring's different. Right. And one of them is, I've never given a shit about getting fired.
Yeah.
And I've been fired a lot. Yeah. Like a lot. I get fired all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, not so much now that I am retired, but I mean, as recently as last year, getting fired.
Yes. Yes.
And like, I have an immunity to it. I don't even, it's like, oh, well, fucking A, they fired me, whatever. And I just keep going. Right.
Yeah.
But it's that fear. It's that fear.
Other,
it's a survival instinct is what you're saying.
Yeah, and that, the other thing that I know about you is that at a very early part of your life, you took charge of your life, and that you put yourself in. And we need to talk about the locus of transformation in a moment. But before we talk about that, so once people say their background conversations, there's this huge relief in the room, huge relief. And that becomes what we call, our job is to install memes. Memes are self-propagating ideas that change behavior, perceptions, and attitudes. So that somebody then, from then on, I mean, if you walk in these companies, from then on, you'll watch people in meetings or in conversations with each other, and they'll say, let me tell you my background conversation. That's a meme. That's a meme. That's our job, is to install ways of people with new behaviors, new perceptions, and new attitudes. And they need something like that. So that becomes one. So then ask people to consider, okay, this is now scrambles everybody's brain. So then I ask people, so I write up, things like describe, explain, interpret, define. I say, so when do you explain something? When do you define something? When do you interpret something? When do you give the reasons for something? And then everybody goes crazy. Well, what you talking about? I don't understand. No. In time, when does this happen? And that's my job. My job is to ask the difficult questions so people can remember that they can think, right? And so,
today, what we're going to do with Professor Bickson is we are going to have him remind us that it's actually fucking possible to think.
Yes, exactly. Okay.
Like the first thing is people are upset because you just said they're not thinking. Right. Exactly. And then we go from there, right? What do you mean we're not thinking? And then
right. And so then show them that all that stuff that they just wrote are descriptions or explanations or interpretations or definitions. And when that happens in time is the past. And then show people that there's a distinction between what has happened and what is happening. And that's called the difference between the past and the present. Christopher, that is a remarkable insight for most people. They forget that they're stuck in this vicious loop that keeps dragging them back into everything that's happened before. And invariably, somebody's got a BlackBerry on the table, and I hold up the BlackBerry and I say, "What happened?" And I hold up an iPhone and I say, "What happened at BlackBerry?" right? What happened was they, even in the face of that kind of evidence.
Isn't that incredible?
The conversations in that company were so stuck in what they already knew and what they thought they could do and what they couldn't do, they couldn't see out. So their first job is to take the past out of the present and put it in the past. Nothing wrong with this, nothing wrong with the past. The mischief starts when we're convinced it's not what did happen, it is what is happening. So if you ask anybody, tell me about so-and-so, tell me about this division, tell me about that customer, tell me about this boss, they will describe it, being convinced that their description is not a description. That's the way it is. That person is like that. That company is like that. That competitor is like that.
As opposed to considering the fact that that's the way I think about that person or that competitor or whatever, that it might not actually fucking be the truth, or, if you will, other people's interpretations.
Yeah. And so, you probably have seen me or seen it. I'll take a tennis ball and I'll say, who here can't catch a ball? First, nobody wants to raise their hand. Oh, okay, I never go catch a ball. Okay, come up here. And I throw the ball. Okay, they drop the ball. I throw it, they drop the ball. I throw the ball, they drop. 4 out of 5 times they drop the ball. I say, okay, that game's over. New game. New game is, I show them the tennis ball. On the tennis ball, there's seams. I say, your job when this ball is coming toward you is tell me which way the seams are turning. They go, what? I can't do what? I don't know. I can't do that. I said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about catching, but you got to tell me which way the seams are turning. Okay, everybody ready? Christopher, I consistently throw it harder. Boom, they catch it. Throw it again. Boom, they catch it. Throw it again. Boom, they catch it. Throw it again. What happened? Then I ask people, what happened? Oh, well, you threw it better. Well, they had more practice. Well, no. What happened is when I ask people who here can't catch a ball, we do what all of us as human beings do. We look into the past. Oh, I remember in 3rd grade, I was playing right field, and I went out there, and the game depended on me catching it. I dropped it. So my story about myself is I can't catch a ball. So when I threw the tennis ball, it wasn't a tennis ball coming. It was a pea coming at supersonic speed, and they acted consistent with a pea coming at supersonic speed. When I defeated that notion of catching the ball and said, watch the seams of the ball, they didn't have a story about seams. So the ball changed literally from a pea coming at them at supersonic speed to a grapefruit slowly moving through the air, which they had all the time in the world to reach up their hands and catch. That's our job as managers and leaders. We're watching people act. Are the conversations we're having trying to get them to catch a ball where their story about themselves is I can't catch? Or do we recognize what actually is happening and create conversations that allows the ball to slow down and be big so they have all the time in the world to catch it? That's speaking. Okay?
Yep, I got you. And so is it possible, Bix?
Yes.
To train ourselves and ultimately to train a company to, in places where we're stuck, where we want to move forward, shift our dialogue, whether it's an internal dialogue or a group dialogue, such that we can, on a consistent basis, access something, a way of thinking, because language, thinking, action gets us to, and then we catch the ball where we never used to.
Yes.
Is that something we can create for ourselves on an ongoing basis, as opposed to sort of accidental brilliance? You know, we were talking earlier about, we come out of the movie Lincoln and we're incredibly inspired, and for 20 minutes or an hour or maybe a day or a week, we're like being awesome and doing awesome things. You know, everybody in the United States remembers what it was like if you were alive after 9/11. There was this feeling in the country of togetherness and of wanting to make a difference and a love for the country and a love for each other and so forth. And that lasted a couple of weeks, right? So I guess my question is, how does one sustain that ability to access action?
Yes, it's a great question. So two things. One is also in the United States, when Kennedy said, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, excuse me, and bring him back alive. Right?
That bring him back alive part was really important if you were the guy that was doing it, right?
Exactly.
We need to be very specific.
Yeah.
You know, I can remember my sister had triplet daughters.
Mm.
And I can remember getting back home to Canada a couple of days after they were born and I changed my niece Vicky's diaper for the first time, and she projectile peed onto me, and I didn't know females could do that. She was in the changing table, and I was right in the line of pee, but because she's a girl, I didn't, anyway, it came right out and get me. And so, long, stupid story, a little bit longer. I remember being in this room and all three of them getting changed and sort of joking with my sister, the next time I pray for a room with 3 naked women in it, I should be more specific.
I love that story.
So the specificity around man to the moon and back, that back part, that specificity matters.
Yeah. And the example of that speaking is there's 3 kinds of talking. There's talking about something, which represents something, when you describe something, when you define something, when you interpret something.
So we're sharing with somebody the restaurant we went to last night.
Yeah. We're sitting in the stands talking about what's happened on the field. And then you're going to the Abraham Lincoln movie, and that's an experience that evokes something. That's talking that is called presence. It evokes an emotion. It evokes an experience. Okay. What Kennedy did is he altered the world. He altered the course of human events. That we are the only species on the planet that can say something and act out of it. Our job is to remember. Remember literally means, Christopher, putting back together again. We forget that we've got something to say about it. And when we forget we have something to say about it, we don't have anything to say about it. So after people have seen that the past and the present become involved in this vicious circle, they forget that there's a whole other possibility available. And that's called inventing, creating, imagining, declaring, standing. That's a different way of speaking. The difficulty with that way of speaking, it requires courage. Because we have learned from the last 400 years of science, if something's true, there's evidence for it. The difficulty is every breakthrough in your life, every breakthrough in the history of humankind, there was no evidence for it. It was a matter of somebody standing up on their own 2 feet and saying something is possible.
And so I just have to underscore this, Bix, because it would be possible for somebody to listen to this conversation who's maybe a little cynical and go, what is all this shit, right?
Yeah.
And in my own life, and it's a big part of why I wanted to do Legends and Losers, and I know Colin feels the same way, what you're saying could not be more true.
Yes.
And, I've shared this with you, but you could describe my life as before Bix and after Bix.
Mm.
And you showed me that a different future was possible.
Mm. And
for me, you were actually emblematic of that.
Mm. Thank you.
And as a result, the trajectory of my life meaningfully changed.
Mm.
And I know that if I don't have that conversation with you, and the conversations I then had with others, because you gave me great tools to have conversations that allowed me to be present in the moment and align my behaviors and actions with what I wanted to achieve, and ultimately have a future far beyond the future that I dreamed of.
Mm.
That's not a fucking bullshit conversation. That fucking happened.
Yes.
And it was as meaningful as anything in my life, Bix.
Mm.
The ability to say, my life is on a trajectory. And in my case, I don't know that there was anything bad about that trajectory. It's not like I was running around murdering people or doing horrible things, but it was not the life that I wanted. And I knew that. There was part of me that understood that there was something else for me, and that if I stayed where I was, which was kind of manual labor and just kind of, in today's, the parlance of our times, thugging it out, mm-hmm. and being a working stiff, that there was something more possible for me than that. Yes. And had I not engaged in exactly the kind of dialogue that you're describing, then that's what happens to me. I'm a manual laborer, and I have a life of struggle, and that's what happens.
Beautifully said. And so what happens is that possibility gets distinguished, that creating, inventing, standing for, declaring, imagining gets distinguished, and people remember that they have a voice. And when they remember they have a voice, then that becomes the organizational conversation. And you mentioned people being cynical. And, our definition of cynicism is simply our attempt to avoid a painful feeling of vulnerability, right? And so we...
Well, hold on there, Handsome. Underscore that. What say, yeah, unpack that.
Cynicism is simply our attempt to avoid a painful feeling of vulnerability.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's right. So we close off all parts of life that won't make us vulnerable, and then we wonder why everybody's walking around here like they're on Novocaine or some terrible thing that just shuts them down. You walk into most companies and it's Deadsville, right? Okay. So
yeah, and we have a negative experience with someone.
Yeah.
Look, when I was a child, they had not invented those little fucking plastic things that go into the light socket.
Yeah.
And so I jam my finger in the light socket.
Yeah.
Now, I can be a little slow, so I think I probably did it more than once. But sooner or later, you go, hey, I'm going to stop doing this because it's not fun, yes. Right? And we learn. But in that case, we did something, we had a negative outcome, and we don't do it again, and we continue with our life.
Right.
But what I hear you saying, Bix, is in relationships, in our personal lives, in our professional lives, or as a company, as part of our culture, if you and I are working together and I have an experience called a negative interaction with you, and I make a decision to say, well, fuck, I'm just not going to collaborate, go to meetings. I just going to try to avoid Bix. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, but it's true on a personal level, but it's true on a corporate level, is that companies also build all their systems to avoid risk. And as you know, the biggest risk is not taking any risks, right?
Well, and in the domain of category design, the thing that I find so fucking fascinating is 52% of the Fortune 500 gone in 17 years. And so, we talk about that, given that one company takes 76% of the economics in any category, you want to be that company. And yet when you say to most senior executives, do you want to be the pioneer in a new category? In general, the answer you get is, fuck, that's the last thing we want. Nobody's going to know what the fuck we're doing, and we don't want to pioneer some new shit and all that stuff. And when you unpack it, and you get to this place that says, actually, launching a company or a product into an existing market is the most risky thing you can do.
Exactly. There you go.
No, it really is.
Yeah.
But the data is the data, right? And yet that is such a profoundly opposite perspective for most people. They can't get there from here.
Yeah, and so why this business, these ideas that we're talking about, form the foundation for any of that thinking is because what gets distinguished is the future. And the future is uncomfortable because we don't have the evidence for it, except if you track against your own experience or every breakthrough that's happened in the humankind. It started with somebody saying, speaking, having a conversation, saying something is possible, and then saying it in a way that others could act in it. And the difficulty is the story I always tell about Magellan. So Magellan goes around the world, gets to the southwest coast of Central America, docks his boat to resupply. His guys are up in the southwest coast of South America resupplying the boat. Somebody from South America comes down to the beach. And he's Magellan's standing on the beach with this guy. And the guy says to him, in however way they could communicate, "How did you get here?" Magellan, standing on the beach, looks out into the water and goes, "On those ships." The guy from South America looks out into the water and goes, "What ships?" Now, then I torture people by asking them the question, where were the ships for the people in South America? And eventually somebody squeaks out, they didn't exist. Yes. So Magellan had the wherewithal to understand, oh, I see, this person has the same eyes as I have, has the same awareness of using their senses that I have. Somehow they can't see what I see. I need to create the idea of ships so they could see them. And then once they could see them, this guy from South America said, oh, ships. We expect people to see what we don't see, what they don't see. And so we create an idea and we expect people to go, oh, of course. Like after every breakthrough, it's oh, of course. No, our job as leaders, our job as managers, our job is to create, invent, imagine, and speak it in the way that other people can see it.
Man, you just explained category design. It reminds me, and of course, future hacking. So what this reminds me of, there's a story. So Airbnb, the company Airbnb, which, is revolutionizing the way people experience travel and so forth, an amazing company. They could not get arrested on Sand Hill Road when they were trying originally because the thinking at the time was, Brian Chesky, the founder of the company, would come and meet with a venture capitalist and he'd say, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to have people rent a room in their house and have tourists come and stay, and the name of the company comes from Air Bed and Breakfast, blowing up an air mattress and selling the fucking air, right? Yeah. So everybody on Sand Hill Road in the beginning goes, that's the fucking dumbest thing who the fuck is going to want some person from I don't know where sleeping on the fucking floor? And who's going to want to sleep on the fucking floor? Nobody was interested, and they had to scrape and scrounge and get traction on their own. And it wasn't until the traction started to happen that people could see the new category. And of course, the rest is history. And so as you're speaking, Bix, here's what question that raises for me. Why is it in the present we real-time hack the past and filter the present through our past? That is to say, Airbnb is a dumb idea based on the fact that I've hacked my past and my past travel experience says this is a fucking dumb idea, as opposed to the state of let me imagine the future. That is to say, hack the future as opposed to hack the past, and look at this discussion with this young entrepreneur through the lens called I'm going to hack what might be possible going forward, as opposed to hack what did happen in the past. Why is past hacking natural and future hacking unnatural?
Well, it's not available. People forget that they've got something to say. So our systems, our schools, our organizations teach people to stay stuck. The great thing about so much of what's happening today in education is they realize it's not keeping up with the world today. And education is now based on play, real education. And play is the difference between the rules of the game and the freedom to act within those rules. So we're...
Hold on.
Yeah.
Can you say that one again for us, Bix?
Play is the difference between the rules of the game and the freedom to act within those rules. The only thing we can watch on TV that we don't know the result of is sports.
Isn't that interesting? And it's funny because, I'm a huge fight fan, in the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship recently last year, about the midpoint last year, sold for $4 billion.
Yeah.
And it was the largest sporting entity transaction in history. And, that caused a lot of discussion and debate, and how could they be worth that much, and this and that and the other. And in the world of marketing, what people said was exactly what you just said, Bix, which is today there is very little what the folks at Netflix originally called appointment viewing, because we can consume, like this podcast, it'll come out when it comes out, and you can listen to it when it comes out, or you can listen to it a week later, or you can binge on all the Legends and Losers, or you can not, and all of that, right? That's how we're mostly experiencing this stuff now. And to your point, sports is the only thing, because it happens in real time.
Yes. That
from a marketing perspective, if you say, hey, I want to deliver my marketing, my advertising at this moment in time to this type of person, a sporting event is the only way you know how to do that, for exactly the reason you just said. Because, and look, I'll tell you, and I'm sure other sports fans have had this, whether you're a football fan or baseball, whatever it is, there's a very big difference between watching it when it's happening and taping it and watching it later. Even if somehow you manage to not know the outcome, it's a very different experience. And so say a little more about that, if you could, Bix.
Well, I want to go back to the idea that you spoke of. How do you sustain this?
Yes. How do we sustain that feeling of access to power, our own personal power? So
once the future, creating, imagining, standing, declaring is distinguished for people, they're remembering, oh yeah, they have something to say. Yeah, I can create, I can invent, I can imagine. And not only that, I can act out of that, and I can get other people to act out of that, right? Okay, that returns people to who we are. The essence of what it is to be a human being is we can create, we can imagine, we can invent. Now there's two futures. Most companies and most people are standing in the present, and they're trying to get to the future. If you're standing in the present, you're trying to get to the future, what's between you and that future is effort and struggle. If you look at the companies, all your play bigger companies, all the big accomplishments in the history of humankind, they weren't waiting for the future to happen. They were standing in the future and calling the present to them. Okay?
Hold on there, handsome. They were standing in the future,
yes,
and calling the present to them.
Yes, that's power.
So I am so clear about the future that I stand for, the future that I'm hacking, the outcome that I say is going to happen, and then I call the present into that future.
Yeah.
You know what I'm reminded of, Bix? I remember years ago, after Martina Navratilova, the famous tennis player, retired. I remember her going on Larry King and doing an interview with him, and Larry asking her what it felt like to win Wimbledon for the first time. And so she describes how she felt. And then at the end of the description, she says, but you know what? I knew exactly how I was going to feel. And Larry says, well, why? And Martina says, because in my mind,
Yes.
I've been winning Wimbledon since I was 3 years old.
I love that story. Exactly.
Is that what you were talking about here, Bix?
Absolutely. And the fancy term for it, because then say to people, we have to overturn the biggest consideration that has us acting the way we're acting.
We have to overturn the biggest consideration that has us acting.
The biggest way of approaching life that has almost all of us, either personally, organizationally, corporately, acting. So then I take a chair, I put it in the middle of the room, and I say, if that chair tells me what I can and cannot do, where's the power? Everybody goes, in the chair. I go, that's what's called being ordinary, is that something outside of us determines what we can and cannot do. And that's, for the most part, what we're all accept. So listen, I was going to do that, that thing that you asked me to do, and we were going to get that proposal done, and we were going to do that bid, and I was going to call the company. I was going to do that, Christopher, but you understand, I got these emails from these other people, and then I ran out of time, so I'm standing in the middle of the room, I'm holding my chair, and I'm trying to give it to somebody in the room. Now, just take my chair. Now, come on, take this chair, come on. And then we say to people, you take my chair, and I take your chair, and we live in an interlocking conspiracy of disloyalty.
Holy fuck. Okay. So we have two people in front of the room. You're doing an exercise. The exercise is all about how there's a thing outside me that prevents me from hacking the future, from having the future that I want. And that's my reason. That's my excuse. Okay. So both people have these chairs. And then what happens?
The other person, I'm trying to give them my chair, right? Or they have their chair too. Yeah. They're trying to give me their chair. And then I buy their chair. They buy my chair, and we live in an interlocking conspiracy of disloyalty. Okay. So,
and that conspiracy is predicated on, we both agree that there are external things that stop us from having what we want in our business or our life.
Exactly. You get it. You're so fast. I love it. So then I say,
I have a good master.
All transformation all being extraordinary is literally, I take the chair from in front of me and I put it behind me. I say, it's still there. You don't get rid of the circumstances. You don't get rid of all the emails. You don't get rid of everything that's out there, but it's no longer determining you. It's now informing you.
It's so funny, just to circle back onto my T-Rexes for a second. This is going to seem like a crazy segue, but
I like segues.
We have it's in complete alignment. We have one of our girls, her name is Gladys. And she had we don't know for sure what, but some condition last year that caused her to go blind in one eye.
Yes.
And when you meet Gladys, you will have an experience of two things. One, you can't tell she's blind in one eye unless you literally, move your finger to the eye that's blind.